Yes, hello, and thank you for joining us today to hear more about the employee reward strategy and how to make VSOP work for your team. If Ragnar's introduction wasn't enough, then I am Kaisa. I'm currently the global reward lead in SaltoX. I have 5 and more years of experience managing global employee stock options in Wise. Previously, it was TransferWise. Maybe some of you even use it. And that experience included creating equity strategy, reward communication, and lots of secondary sales. So it's my passion to make equity easy, but I know it's not easy.
Hey, my name is Philip. I'm the ex-CEO of a company called Yes.com. We sold in December last year. I've been a public accountant at PwC for a couple of years, 9 plus, in Frankfurt and in New York. I angel invest since 2015 and started doing some fund invest. And I am a good example on how not to set up an ESOP program.
I'm the good example. I'm very happy with my experience in Wise. But yeah, so let's start. Why are long-term incentives even important? And I would like to start with the research of Bill Gross, who looked into why do some startups succeed and some fail. And he found that the most important factor was actually timing. But it's really, really hard to time your product. It has a lot to do with luck. So the next important factor was the team. How good is your team? And once you have your team, how can you keep your amazing team? So that brings me to the big topic of attraction and retention. Now you might be wondering, why am I here in 2023 talking about attraction and retention when we've had waves and waves of layoffs since COVID started in 2019, and there should be plenty of talent available for everyone, right? I mean, can you raise your hands who of you have been in companies in the last few years that have had layoffs? That's kind of shows what the market is like, right? And despite that, last year, Willis Towers Watson survey said that around 90% of companies globally still struggle with attraction and retention of their key employees. So this topic is never going to go away, and companies look at ways to solve it. Another survey said that the number one reason why workers seek for a new job is salaries and wages.
Maybe in this direction, like who is working in a company that has an ESOP program installed? Has. And how many work in a company that is working on installing one? Okay.
So some, but not all, right? If you're interested in which employee groups have the biggest challenges in attraction and retention, then there's no surprise here. It's still IT, engineers, and then come all the other groups. And you might wonder, okay, so is paying more an option if salary is the number one reason that employees are leaving? I would say not anymore, because it seems like the golden time of startups, maybe it's not over, but it's on a bit of a pause due to the general recession that we have in the world, and all companies are trying to save money and be as frugal as possible. That brings us to the reward strategy. If companies can't afford to keep raising salaries, they need to look beyond pay. And for that, they combine other benefits for total rewards. They can be physical, mental, social, and financial aspects. And today we are concentrating on the financial part. Equity-like ownership, as well as equity, in my opinion, is a great financial benefit that you can give to your employees without burning cash. And I would think that it's also an amazing benefit during layoffs, because you can actually have less people being laid off if you lower wages and offer equity in return. But I've seen very few companies use this approach. Not sure it's because they're not aware of this, or they just want to go the easier way. Beats me.
Yeah, it's a very interesting number. It struck me because I expected more companies to offer ESOP to the employees. So this number only is valid for startups. We're not even talking about 58% of the companies in Germany, but 58% of German tech companies. How is it in Estonia?
My gut feeling is that we have a lot more tech companies with employee ownership plans, because I personally don't know anyone working in a startup that doesn't offer options for their employees. I don't even know if anyone would want to work in a startup that doesn't offer options. It's such a strong standard. But I've heard that in Germany that's not actually the case, and that in fact a lot of people here don't like talking about money. And not just that, but you don't like to emphasize that you're giving out equity or equity substitution VSOP if you're doing a job ad. So you like to keep it quiet. And I would encourage all of you to start a new trend and maybe use it in your advantage that other companies are not putting it on job ads, because the rest of the world is doing this, and get the talent like that, because information has to start flowing somewhere. And jobs ads are one of the places for that. Anything to add?
Questions so far?
For this part? All good? Okay, then let's get to the slightly more complicated topic. How do you actually allocate your equity or VSOP? I don't want to discuss much about the legal side of it, how to create the templates, because there's plenty of templates around online and you can get them from lawyers. Also, I won't go into how to set up your pool or what percentage of the pool you should create. You have online resources for that, for example, optionplan.com or venturehacks.com, option pool shuffle. You have a screenshot on the right-hand side of it. And these are Index Ventures resources that I've found really useful myself, and I know other people, especially founders, have used these extensively. But what I actually want to concentrate on is how do you decide on the framework, on how much you give to your people. And in my experience, I've come across two different approaches or models for this, and I've called them percentage of salary or a specific amount model. In case of a percentage of salary, you would have an employee, let's say, get 100,000 euros for salary for a year. And you'd say that, okay, they're getting 50% worth of stock based on their salary. So their stock would be 50,000 euros worth of options over 4 years, because the general option grant agreement that's been given out right now is 4 years long. And the specific amount per role and level would be that you have a table and you've assigned that the specific role, let's say a senior engineer, gets 2,000 options despite or irregardless of where they're located. So you can have Hungary, you can have Germany, you can have UK. If it's a senior engineer, they're getting 2,000 options. So I will go into more detail why one or the other is better. But before I do that, maybe Philip wants to comment on which approach he has seen as the more better one, or what's being used.
I can give details on how we did it. We basically had salaries, the base salary streamlined across the organization based on the hierarchy level. So we basically had 3 different buckets of salaries, and then the ESOP pool was a function on top. Let's say you make 50K in fixed cash, you would get a 30K in ESOP on an annual basis based on the current valuation. For us, it was really important to communicate euro numbers for people to understand. Today, the company is valued at 70 million euros, and you get out of these 70 million, you have a 30,000 allocation per year. That was very easy it made it a lot easier for our people to actually understand what they are getting.
So yeah, from what I understood, his approach was a bit of a hybrid of both of them to make things more complicated. Something I like to say is that in compensation, there's no right or wrong way. It's more of an art than science. So you have all these different approaches. Every company can be different. And the more you know of the different approaches, the better you can come up with a strategy that works for you and for your company values.
Yeah, that wasn't actually a suggestion. That was just the way how we did it. And there are definitely a thousand arguments why you should not set it up this way. we were lucky in a way because our staff was basically located all in Western Europe, not in Germany and Switzerland, mostly in Switzerland, but also in Spain and France. So we understood that the levels of the salary levels are kind of comparable. But then it's from a tax perspective, it gets more and more complicated, especially because we didn't do a virtual stock option program.
Yeah, to go more in depth into the grant as a percentage of salary approach, I'd say that the advantages is that it takes the local market into consideration because in terms of spending power, employees in richer countries won't lose out because their salaries in richer countries are higher, so they get a higher percentage of value worth of options, whereas those in slightly less richer countries get a smaller grant. The difficulties with this is if you have a lot of people switching between offices, you have to, I can see smiling faces in the audience nodding that they know the hardness of this, but difficulty is that if you have someone going from one location where they got less of a grant going to a country that gives more options, you just give more to them, right? But then if they go back, you would have to take away from them, and that's legally really difficult, not to mention demotivating for the employee. So it's quite a hurdle to come over. And also, if you give real equity, not VSOP, then the question of equality comes into play because the employees in richer countries get a higher percentage of the company ownership itself. So you have people who are engineers in one country, engineers in the other country, their salaries are widely different, and that also means that the ownership in the company is different, but that's a bit unfair, right? Whereas the specific amount per role approach, it's really easy to explain to everyone on the same job level that they get the same slice of the company. It's also easy to manage for relocators because in every country, if you have a customer support agent in UK, or if you have them in Estonia, they get the exact same amount. But the problem with this is that it's unfair in terms of spending power, because if you get 100,000 euros worth of bonus for VSOP in Germany versus you get it in Hungary, then you can buy a lot less in Germany with that money than you can in Hungary. So there is no perfect way of setting this up. There's pros and cons to both approaches.
But on the other side, once your VSOP kicked in and you had a liquidity event, you're free to move to Hungary, right? So it's
and be a digital nomad. Yes, absolutely. The second part of creating this framework, I would say, is to create the structure. I created a nice table for you, so it's easier to follow, but the first step would be to figure out how you wish to group your teams. I found that one of the more basic ways is to group them into 3 categories. The first is product and engineering, the second are supportive teams like finance, HR, marketing, and then lastly, it's the more operational teams such as customer service and sales. And then you would add a level of hierarchy to it. You can obviously have more, and where I worked, there were more hierarchies, but for simplicity, let's say you have junior specialists, senior specialists / leads, and directors. And then you would add a percentage of the salary that you want to give to them, and you put it into a table. And then it's pretty easy to use to check, okay, I have a finance senior specialist joining, they're getting 20% of their salary as options. If you have the grants as a certain amount, the first 2 parts would be exactly the same. You figure out how you wish to group your teams, you add a level of hierarchy, and then you figure out the amount of options you want to give. And this would be globally relevant to all of your offices. The next point I would do is add a bit of flexibility. So not all companies do this, but I find it quite useful, is to decide the ranges that you allow equity to be exchanged for salary. I'm not sure how common this is in Germany to ask for this. Maybe you can comment on it.
Yeah, I think if I think about flexibility, we discussed a lot about compensating employees, but you can also think about how to get the best advisors on board. In our case specifically, we were able to get people on board, let's say the former head of identity of Microsoft, or the former CEO of Swift, and we were able to compensate them with ESOP. So even if you're not just thinking about employees, for us it was really important to get the right people aligned on our success, and that kind of worked out just fine for us.
Yeah, in my experience, we've also used it for advisors, but at least in the offices that Wise was at, which is Eastern European offices, also Western European, but in North America and Asia, the most people who approached us with, hey, I want more options or I want more salary, were engineers as well as executive people and some product managers. So they already knew the worth of equity or equity-like compensation from their previous companies. They said, hey, I'm actually okay if you give me a bit less salary, but I want to get the bigger part of the company's success. And this is where it comes in really useful if you have already decided beforehand how much of it are you willing to exchange. So would it be 10% of the salary for equity? Would it be 15% or 20%? So it's something to think about ahead of time. So when the recruiter comes to you, or maybe you are the recruiter, you know what to do. The next step would be to decide when to regrant, because giving the first grant to your employee when they join the company is only the beginning. If you're a good employer, hopefully they will stay with you for a longer time, and they will get at one point promoted. And with that comes the expectation of also a larger equity grant. What I did was calculate the difference between what the employer already had versus how much I would give someone who would come from outside of the company and come to that position. So I took their existing grant minus whatever the new person would get. Actually, the other way around.
So what we did in our company, because we basically froze the salaries. We didn't increase the salaries for 4 years, but what we did, we increased the options for the people, which meant, let's say you have an option program with a 4-year vesting period, and you're in year 2 or 3, we would just add another layer, a new vesting agreement on top. So, layering kind of worked out for us, because then it's even harder for employees to leave in year 3,
I've heard of this approach being used as well, so that employees get yearly grants instead of one bigger grant for 4 years. You get a smaller grant every year. But besides the promotion, what can happen is also that the employee stays for 4 years if they have a 4-year grant, and it becomes fully vested. Then again, if you're a nice employer, you would want all your employees or the employees who previously had equity or equity-like compensation to still have it. And again, I ask myself the question, what would I give to a new employee if they joined the company right now? And that's the amount of VSOP I would give them. And the third option, which I saw once the company was slightly older, is that employees have already several grants, and some of them end vesting, others are in the middle, third ones are at the end. So how do you approach that situation? Again, I would calculate the difference of what is still vesting versus what a new hire would get at that point. And in Wise, the problem to solve was actually for the team leads. They had to check their people's schedules and know when to offer them more, because HR would just not be able to keep track of all of this. And lastly, but also not any less important, is reviewing the levels that we just created. I find it useful to do this after every funding round, because that's where the price of the share changes and you have a clear way of communicating to your employees why are the amounts changing. I would also add that this applies only for new grants, so you don't go and start changing the grants that you have already given out to your employees. This is if someone new joins the company after the funding round, you give them the new amount that you have calculated that you want to give them.
I think very important in these economic circumstances is thinking about how are you treating the ESOP in a down round. So you said basically you are reviewing the ESOPs after every funding round. This is especially true for down rounds. So we've read a lot about down rounds in the past 8 months, and we have to understand what happens to the ESOP pool, and how do you compensate for the loss, basically.
Yeah, and another really important thing is how do you communicate to your employees? Of course, different companies have different levels of transparency. I'm used to very high levels of transparency, so all of our employees had these tables. They knew what each role was worth. So if they moved to a different department or if they were promoted, they knew exactly how much they would get. So when we had the step downs, we also communicated to them why it was happening, how the share price changed, and what they can expect in the future. And we tried different approaches. You can do it as one big step down. So if you look at the table here, like product engineering junior specialist, you could say that on a single date in the future, the amount they get will change from 600 options to 300 options. Or alternatively, you could do it in several smaller steps. Say in 1 month, we're going from 600 to 500. The next month, we're going from 500 to 400. Then we're going from 400 to 300. So it's more gentle on the employees. And again, it's up to you how you communicate this.
Case study. So we have heard so much. Do you have any questions so far to any of the previous slides or this one?
Maybe for later. Like I'm in a free equity founder. You're always referring to the share price as a measure to calculate the value of the options. How do you communicate and how do you calculate the value prior to an equity round? Because you want to still incentivize, especially for employees that you get on board.
Yeah, so I think what you do, I understand you are pre any funding rounds. I think you have to understand what you are comfortable to giving away. You're giving, if you think about like, how do you split the equity among co-founders? So maybe it's split evenly. If you are hiring someone that is, going to be like a CPO type role, you have to understand how many percent of the company in the early days you're giving away. I think at this stage, I wouldn't think so much about valuation, but more about percentage. Then it's more ownership, but in a virtual stock option plan, ownership is, if you're never meant to own equity, it's a different discussion. But at the core, it depends on, if you start early with us, you get a lot more than people that start later. I think that's the essence.
The communication is definitely more difficult because you're selling more hope than actual hard facts. But I think the employees who are joining such a new company also know it. So they look more, as Philip said, the percentage of what they're getting than what the percentage is actually worth.
How do you distribute the stock options to employees in different countries? Do you give the stock options to them directly, or do you hand out the stock options through a subsidiary, for example?
So that's a good question. If it's what we always did, the ESOP in our case, it was a real ESOP, was always issued by the mother company, by the topco. The local, so we had two local entities, and they were only calculating the labor tax, employee tax.
So my
even on that
same.
ESOP, yeah.
That mother company is the one that gives out the options, but I'm sure it's possible to do it more difficult ways. Maybe I will carry on a bit, and then afterwards you can ask more questions. I have a small case study for you in which I can put everything into use that we went through, so you have a bit of a more practical viewpoint of it as well. Let's say we have a junior software engineer who is getting hired by a Series A stage startup in Berlin. and the company's option framework is based on the percentage of salary approach. And this engineer, according to our table, gets options worth of 30% of their salary. The salary offer is 50,000 euros per year, and the percentage that can be negotiated in this company is the maximum 10% of salary. This would mean that with their original offer, the junior engineer gets 15,000 euros worth of options, because that's 30% out of the 50,000 euro salary. And this 15,000 euros worth of options is then given in a grant that carries over 4 years. However, we had a very savvy and smart junior engineer, and they knew that they already want more options because they had been in a different company as well. So they asked for a second offer. Could I please have more options? And the company calculated that, okay, the maximum amount that we can change is this 10%. So the new salary would be 50,000 less 5,000, 45,000 euros. And the new option offer would be 15,000 plus 5,000, coming together at 20,000 euros worth of options. So this is how you would make it more flexible. This engineer loved the company that they worked at, and in 3 years' time, they were promoted to a senior engineer position. The base salary for that in this company is 80,000 euros, and it's 50% salary worth of options. So now we have to look at how much is this position worth in terms of his salary. So 50% out of 80,000 is 40,000 euros worth of options. However, this engineer still has a grant of 15,000 options vesting from the previous hiring process. So the new grant would be 40,000 minus 15,000, coming to 25,000 euros worth of options. I know this is a lot of numbers, but I just wanted to run you through the process of how I have thought about it and how I have gone through this. And why some of you might be thinking, why don't I just give him the 40,000 worth of options? Because that's the amount that is put in the table, right? But this would mean that every time someone is promoted, they get a new full grant, and the people in the company who get promoted the most, let's say they have very small promotions, they get the most grants and it's most beneficial for them. Whereas those who maybe work as a specialist for 3 years and then get a higher bump, they only get one grant and they lose out. So to make it more equal, I have looked at what the people have vesting as well. Yeah, do we have any questions about this case study or the approach? So either you all understood what I was saying or you understood absolutely nothing. Great. Okay, in that case, I also put a few insightful resources for you that maybe you find useful. The first is the Index Ventures Rewarding Talent book, which I very much recommend. I think it's one of the best books still available on how to give out options. And you can apply the same logic to VSOP in Germany. The second is The Psychology of Money. It doesn't talk exactly about options, but if you're a founder or an HR person, I found this book myself extremely useful in understanding how people think about money, how emotional actually everyone's approach to money is, and how much the history of what we have gone through as persons influence our decisions. So it's a very good context. And lastly, I put This Is Not a Book. This is a podcast that some of you might know, Unicorn Bakery. Our own founder Ragnar today recorded an episode with them, so I just urge you to listen to them. Yeah. So thank you.